Good morning and welcome to another edition of Wake Up with YPN. Happy Monday. This morning we have our legal counsel, Gabe Walsh, with us from the Iowa Association of REALTORs. Good morning, Gabe.
Good morning. How's it going, Whitney? Great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, it's awesome to have you here. Can you introduce yourself quick for us? Let everybody know who you are.
Absolutely. My name is Gabe Walsh. I am the legal counsel for the Iowa Association of REALTORs. I've been in this position since July of 2019. So time flies, but happy to be here, and I definitely certainly love being in this role. So great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive right in and let's talk about some situations we don't always get to talk about in real estate. So first, can you explain the process of filing a code of ethics violation and what happens?
Absolutely. So I think even before we get there, Whitney, if I can just real quick, I think one of the huge points is since October, we went to a statewide professional standards program. And now from start to finish, if you file an ethics complaint, it's handled at the state association. When you file it, right, you have to file it generally within 180 days of an event that takes place. And once you file it, it's going to go to a grievance committee. And essentially that grievance committee is going to look at the complaint and determine, is there anything here? Does this deserve to go on to a hearing? And if there's a baseline level of information, and basically if it's possible a violation of the code of ethics occurred, a grievance committee is then going to forward it on to the professional standards committee to arrange for a hearing. So that's kind of just the basic process.
Wonderful. So we used to have that committee here at ICAR in-house. And so now that it's at the, let's say, the state level, can you talk about how the association benefits from joining you guys over at the state level?
Sure. I think one of the big things, so when I got here in July of 2019, it was very clearly communicated to me that for a number of years, local boards across the state were really wanting the state to go in this direction. And I think a big part of it is smaller boards, right? Like ICAR, you guys have what, around 500 members, which is a fairly big board in the state of Iowa. But there's a lot of associations that are less than 100 members even. And when you're talking an ethics complaint, pretty much everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody really well. And that can sometimes make it very hard to make people feel like they're going to get a fair shake if they file an ethics complaint. And they feel like there's so many repercussions from it. Versus now, instead of having those smaller boards, 100 people under the jurisdiction of that ethics process, we now have 6,100 realtors who are part of the statewide program. So if somebody files a complaint against a realtor in Iowa City, there might be hearing panelists from Council Bluffs, Sioux City, Des Moines, and Burlington even, which takes away a lot of those issues.
Yeah, makes it a little more comfortable to be heard and not keep it, inside. So that kind of leads to, when is it appropriate to actually file a violation? Talking the difference of like when it's someone just being unprofessional or when someone really needs to file.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things, right? Not everything is an ethics complaint. Sometimes rather than going through this process, there's going to be ways that you can work with each other, be partners in this business and try to resolve whatever's happening in a transaction that's making things not go smoothly. But sometimes things truly do rise to that level of an ethics complaint. And the reality is that unless you take it upon yourself to bring that issue to light and hold that realtor accountable, these things are just going to continue to happen. And it's realtors who have an obligation as realtors to protect this industry, to protect this public, and to make sure that when things are happening that shouldn't be, that are violations of the code, that they're informing their boards and filing these complaints.
Nicely put. So with that violation, who can file a violation? Can the public, just realtors? What's that look like?
Yeah, so it can go both ways. I would say there's a good split of complaints that you see, but anybody who believes a realtor has violated the code of ethics is welcome to file a complaint. So that could be a consumer who's upset with how a realtor maybe behaved in a transaction. It could be somebody in an agency or even a non-agency relationship. Of course, realtors can also file complaints against other realtors. And I think one other thing, Whitney, if I can, to keep in mind is there's two processes, right? There's our process of ethics complaints, but then our friends at the Real Estate Commission have a totally separate process too. And a lot of times we'll see people file complaints both at the Real Estate Commission and with the Code of Ethics. But of course, our Code of Ethics is our Code of Ethics. What the Real Estate Commission does is certainly important, but we're not bound to anything that the Real Estate Commission does because it's our code and it's our responsibility to enforce it. But I think it's good to be aware that there are those two processes in place. Yes.
And for our process here, how long does that typically take? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Just, we don't get, too deep into that, but just so people can get a bit of understanding if they feel the urge to make a violation, kind of what that might look like.
Absolutely. Usually, so the grievance committee at IAR meets once a month. So once a complaint's filed, we're going to put that in front of the grievance committee at its next regularly scheduled meeting. By the time the grievance committee reviews that and forwards it on for a hearing, it can be anywhere from a few weeks to a month and a half, something like that. But then once it goes to professional standards, it's probably another month or two before it actually gets to a hearing because you have to give the parties a chance to respond. You have to give the parties a chance to hire counsel if they want counsel to help them with their cases. Exhibits get exchanged. You got to try to get 5 hearing panelists and multiple parties and attorneys to try to find one date that's going to work for everybody. Usually, though, in 3 to 4 months for sure, the complaints are generally taken care of. That's sort of the timeline.
Perfect. And so after those months, can someone appeal?
Yes, absolutely. So one other thing to note is we do all of our hearings over Zoom. So everything is done in this sort of virtual format. If a party wants to appeal the decision of the hearing panel, there's very specific bases on which a complainant can appeal and which a respondent can appeal. But yes, after the case is over, they can appeal that decision on specific grounds. We record the hearings over Zoom. So there's an audio file recorded that the parties can utilize if they believe that there's a basis for an appeal. But once that appeal is done, and whatever the decision of that appeal panel is, that decision is final. Okay. And of course, I think one other thing people don't really realize that's important is when you have an ethics case, the hearing panel makes its decision, right? And after that decision is made by the hearing panel, they send out a written decision to the parties that explains, here's our decision. If we found you in violation, here's our recommended discipline. That is essentially a proposed decision that's subject to final approval by the board of directors or a panel of directors. So if it's not appealed, it's still going to go that one other level to make sure that it checks out. But once that last stage is done, it's a final decision.
Understood. Wonderful. What things am I not kind of touching on? Is there anything that you think we should add in there, let people know type thing? Anything else?
I think we touched on this a lot, but I think that there, at least in my experience, there's a lot of misunderstanding. I'll get a lot of people who will file complaints that just sort of think, association, I don't really want to be involved in this. I don't really want to show up at a hearing and explain what happened. I have to work with this person, but here's the complaint, association, you all need to do something. And what's important is realtors bear the burden of holding others responsible for violations of the code. So the association doesn't really have authority to do anything unless a realtor participates in this process and brings forward a complaint. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Again, these are all being done over Zoom. There is really, I think this is important, if you ever are going to file a complaint, on the Iowa Association of REALTORS website under the legal tab, there's now a tab that says like Code of Ethics. And we've created an online, it's essentially a SurveyMonkey interactive form where you can file an ethics complaint. And it's much more user-friendly. If you fill out that complaint properly, chances are you're going to have filled out a complaint properly. So definitely utilize that.
Wonderful. We do have a question here.
Absolutely.
So if you can answer it, I'm going to pop it on you. So a realtor in the area is asking, can you file an ethics violation if you sign a hold harmless agreement? Great question.
Can you file an ethics complaint? Well, what I would say is, there's two things going on, right? When you're talking about a hold harmless agreement, you were talking about somebody not being legally liable in some way, shape, or form. Generally, I've never seen a hold harmless agreement that says I can't be, responsible for any types of ethics violations if you sign this. That would not be an enforceable thing, in my opinion. So I don't think a hold harmless agreement would have any effect on whether or not somebody can file an ethics complaint against you.
Yeah, and we can probably dig deeper with Derek offline too, if that is, if it's just a general question, wonderful question. If there is something behind that, let us know, Derek. Let's see. I think I got another question coming in. Let's see. So we don't normally have questions. So this is new for me, Gabe. Hang in there.
All right.
Let's see. We've got, can you explain the new article 10.5?
Great question. Do I got just a couple minutes? I'm going to give you a high level overview, but standard or Article 10 of the Code of Ethics has been there for a long time, right? You have to provide equal professional services to all people as part of this profession, regardless of race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, other things I'm missing. But if you're in a protected class, you can't discriminate against those protected classes. Well, over the course of the summer and a lot of the unrest that's been taking place and a lot of discussions around race, NAR was faced with this question of, if we have a member that's on Facebook, maybe they're not in a real estate transaction, but they're on Facebook, if they're up at the bar and they're making just like crazy, racist, derogatory, hateful speech, is that subject to the Code of Ethics? And what everybody realized is the code didn't really encompass that situation at the time. So there was a couple things that were done. Policy Statement 29 in the Code of Ethics was amended to say, it's not just real estate transactions where the code applies. It's all conduct of a realtor. So those Facebook situations, you might not be in the middle of a real estate transaction, but if you're saying racist things or hate speech or epithets or slurs, as 10.5 says, you can be found in violation of the Code of Ethics, even if it's not part of a real estate transaction. The idea being that is evidence of inability to provide equal professional services in a real estate transaction. So again, great question. That is a change to the Code of Ethics, but I think it's really within the spirit of what we've known all along, that has no place. But great question.
Yes, thank you for answering that. We've got another one. So what happened to the violations newsletter?
How long has it been since that's existed?
I don't know.
I talk with our communications all the time about our Benchmark magazine and how that was a big part of the up ratings for the Benchmark at some point in time, because my understanding is it used to be you opened up the magazine and saw the names of everybody who violated and what they did. What the NAR manual says is you can't do that unless your association adopts a specific policy to publish violators. We haven't made that determination to do so, but we have a risk management committee at the state association, as well as our leadership team or board members on the IR board of directors. If that's something that you think should be part of the program, feel free to talk to leadership, and that'd be a conversation to have with them.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad people are getting their voices heard and that people are getting some questions. We do like that. And you've been very prepared, and I love that you're going with the flow with me on those. So I don't have anything else question-wise, and I think we've kind of covered most of the topics that we had wanted to get answered. And if anything comes to us later on, we will certainly be in touch with you, Gabe.
Absolutely.
That's
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And if any questions, go ahead and shoot me an email, get in touch with me, and be happy to hear you out on any concerns. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for jumping on with us this morning, and we will chat with you another time.
Thanks a lot, Whitney.
Thanks, Gabe.